Well, I'm so excited for this interview. I've been wanting to talk to you for a very long time because you are an expert in this area of Chicano studies in your own educational pursuits, just your own interests. I feel like I've learned a lot from you throughout my life. And so,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm grateful to have you here. And I want to first introduce you. You are first and foremost my big brother, Jerome Chavez, but also so much more than that. I look at you as a scholar, a historian. I've seen you speak, I've seen your advocacy, I've seen and read the work that you've done. And I'm really proud to know that you have taken this on in your own life and career, but also proud as your sister and as part of this family that you are helping us as a culture better understand our roots. So
And also, I am very proud of the work that you've done, and in all your career too. And yeah, thanks for having me on here.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I'd love for you to just, tell people about your background and what you're currently doing because you're doing a lot. And I know you're now a professor, Professor
Well, not quite.
Chavez.
My name is Jerome Chavez. You're my sister, but I am a first year PhD student in the Chicana and Chicano Studies department at the University of New Mexico. I recently obtained my master's degree in that same department last spring, and I'm continuing my studies and going for my doctorate.
Amazing. Amazing. Ah, that's such hard work. And we've talked about this and just, higher education and when you're actually studying what you want to study and you're putting, I mean, I feel like you put your everything into it,
Yeah, it is a lot.
your heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, higher education is so important, but especially to choose this topic, Chicano studies. Um, to me, when I first heard you were studying this, I thought, wow, first, what all does that entail? And then it just made me think of the word Chicano, Chicana, the words and what that really represents. I had first thought it was a derogatory term, and I think
Yeah,
as Chicanos and Chicanas, we hear a lot of things. We hear a lot of things in terms of how people refer to us. As
sure.
are we Hispanic? Are we Spanish? Are we Mexican? Are we Mexican American? Are we Latinos? I mean, I've heard so many things. So everywhere I've lived, I've heard a different term. But I was hoping you could help. What is the difference between Hispanic, Latino, and Chicano? And what are the differences in those terms?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of different interpretations for these terms. A lot of people go by these different terms. But overall, just let's start with Chicano, the name of our department, and what a lot of people call us. But Chicano more or less mean of Mexican descent who lives in the United States, or was born in the United States. So it is the Mexican experience inside the United States. A kind of more softer term is Mexican American, and one scholar pointed out that Chicano is like the hyphen between Mexican and American, because with our historical experience, the Southwest U.S., which was the northern part of Mexico, was taken over by the U.S. The people here and who would come here were no longer Mexican, but yet weren't fully accepted as American. So, and Chicano, which was a derogatory term, was created to describe them, and that term kind of came more from us, our community. It's been described as a term of defiance, to show that we know who we are.
Like we know who we are. It feels like it's like an empowered term. It's one
Yes,
that the culture claimed versus the majority culture claiming, which is sort of how I see Hispanic. I know you and I have talked about that. I've never really used that term, but Hispanic has always felt like something that the other has used to identify a very large group of people, which I think is again, sort of these bigger, broader terms that doesn't sort of see the diversity within, all of the groups within
Yeah,
the.
exactly. Yeah, Hispanic basically means anyone of Spanish speaking origin. And, then include a lot of different groups, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, and so forth. And it's been used as a term like for the census to kind of categorize a lot of us. And another term is Latino, which is basically anyone of Latin American origin. There's a lot of problems with these because one, both of those terms kind of deny our indigenous heritage, and Chicano itself, it comes from the root Mexicano. That word itself comes from the Mexica, the Aztecs, the largest indigenous nation in Mexico. And so another reason people have used Chicano is to get more in touch with our indigenous roots. And Hispanic and Latino denies that. People still identify that as those terms or also their country of origin. The largest Hispanic or Latino group is Mexicans or Mexicanos. If you look at polls, people identify with their country of origin or Hispanic more than Chicano, which is all right.
One thing that I was thinking of too, I always heard in our family was Spanish. That
Mm-hmm.
we're Spanish, and what does that mean? And so, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the identity of Spanish, where we grew up in the Southwest and New Mexico being a very common term as well of identity for many New Mexicans.
Throughout our history, Mexican has been a dirty word. And, people just didn't want to identify as Mexican and, go further or, as indigenous or Indian. And in New Mexico, which had the longer period of Spanish colonization, there's this myth that we were all of Spanish descent. We're all descendants from the conquistadors. Well, first of all, historically, that isn't true. There was actually very few actual Spaniards who came into Mexico and then also came up north. And the expeditions up north, for every conquistador that came, they had many indigenous servants, and the lighter skin you were, the whiter you were, the more accepted in positions. It's popular to say that we're of Spanish descent, which tied us to Europe rather than we're Mexican.
Or to your point, Chicanos, which sort of brings in the indigenous background and culture and
Yes.
presence, especially in New Mexico. I feel like New Mexicans have such a unique culture. When I came to California, I had the issue of people being like, "Ah, you're Mexican, you're Latina," and I'm like, "Oh, I'm actually from New Mexico, and that's our culture, and our, everything is different in that culture." Well, I feel, in terms of the food, the traditions, the things that we do uniquely from living in New Mexico that are very different. Like, yeah, we kind of have our own unique family heritage and tradition, which I hope you could speak to a little of that. I know we both have done some deep diving into our background and culture, but we've looked at family trees. We have relatives that have done a lot of research, but tell me a little bit about our family heritage and what you know, including generations, just to where we come from and what you know in terms of our own unique history as Chavez, as a Chavez family. And I know we have Candelaria on one side of our family, but in terms of what you know, what can you share?
Okay, well, first of all, there's many different regional variations. New Mexico has a lot of its own history, along with California and Texas. New Mexico itself, as you mentioned, it has been a very contentious issue. But with the history, like, our family, the Chavezes, our grandparents had land up in the North Valley in the neighborhood Alameda, and it was part of an acequia community. And the acequias were basically gravity ditches that irrigate, the crops. And as urbanization, that way of life has disappeared a lot. Although there are many places here in New Mexico that are keeping that alive. That the land that we used to visit in the summers. That's it was part of a larger land grant. Look up the history of the land grants. Those little things were part of our broader history.
That is so fascinating. You're right. With so many good memories of that part of growing up on basically a farm, all this farmland, running around with animals and seeing, our grandfather who had these farms, and he was a winemaker, and just the
Yeah.
community that was existed in that area that has changed a lot drastically, in the past
Yes. And
maybe 20 plus
yeah,
years.
familiar with Albuquerque. Yeah, it's grown a lot, and yeah, it was a rural area, but increasingly urbanized. Hardly anyone there farms anymore. We do have a lot of our memories there, and part of my work, in academia right now, tie those memories to that broader history and continue to preserve it in that way.
That's amazing. And I mean, I think that's so important. I think that's the whole purpose of having a heritage month in talking about culture. What I love about this month is that I get to read stories and hear people come out and really identify and talk about their culture and their tradition and where they come from, and to see all the diversity
Mhm.
within the Latino Chicano world is, I don't know, it makes me really proud. Want to tell my story and us to tell our stories and our background.
Yeah, I think that's important. We should tell our stories. Your experience too is a Chicano experience, and a lot of work in our department does deal with oral histories. The regular everyday lives that we live. That's part of our history, and of our parents and grandparents, and that history should be recorded
Yes.
and preserved.
Definitely, definitely. And I know that we could think of like historical figures and people to celebrate, but I think what comes to mind is just, celebrating what we've seen in our family. I mean, I feel like we grew up with some hardworking Chicanos, people that were always working hard, always hustling, always uh, helping out. Even I think of our grandmother, who got her education as a single mother of five, and got her
Yeah,
teaching degree and went to school, and still took care of a family, and those work ethics, that I'm proud of that, because I feel like that's what I learned, that's what I observed. I mean, we were raised by a very hardworking single mom as well, who learned that from her mother, who now passed it on to me and to you. And so I feel very proud of those figures in our life who helped us sort of learn that sense of being a Chicano in America, right? You got to work hard, you've got to get your education, you've got to have traditions. I know that there's still traditions that are important to our family no matter what, and even the concept of family, joyous together, celebrating, eating together, the things that we do that are kind of normal but are really preservation of our culture through our family, that I'm glad that we still have, and that we
exactly.
still can honor. Yeah. Are there any figures this month, like as someone like in the Chicano world, that would be important for me or anyone to know, that want to really embrace this identity, that should be just historical figures that have really helped?
One person I do want to just point out, also very important because like her image and be on the U.S. quarter. Her name is Jovita Idar. She was an American journalist, teacher, political activist, and civil rights worker, and championed the causes of Mexican Americans, Mexican immigrants. She presided in Texas. Take a look at her, especially since she's going to be on some of our currency, and she's a very important Mexican American leader.
Amazing. I did not know that, and literally going to be on the quarter. So I'm excited to learn more about her story, history, her story. It's good to see that we're seeing representation like that in the culture too. I know for myself as a psychologist, I felt that entering this field, there wasn't a lot of diversity. So even in my practice, offering more culturally sensitive therapy, talking more about culturally informed issues. Specialty as a sex therapist obviously is dealing with a lot of deeply rooted issues, shame, religious influence, how culture really shapes our relationship with pleasure and how we pursue sex in our lives. So when I first entered the field, I noticed that there wasn't a lot of I would say maybe kind of distinct voices in that area, that it's becoming more of that. I mean, now we have whole directories where people can find, Latinx therapists or work with people from their culture and background. But even when I entered personally as a psychologist, I mean, even in our culture, it was sort of a not taboo, but I remember family and friends going, therapist, who goes to therapy, that's a white people thing, and it was so many things that were being said and being in this field, and now being able to work more with conservative cultures and backgrounds, and people that are coming from very similar traditional backgrounds with modern problems, and how we can help bridge those gaps. It's become a passion of mine to really do that, and preserving the culture. How do we preserve our culture, but being open-minded and adapting new culture? And I'm curious from you, what would you say are things in the Chicano experience and history that you feel is important for us to preserve in our modern life that we're living?
Just going back on what you talked about, yeah, historically, we haven't been able to speak, for ourselves and our experiences. And, even in these professional fields, people like us weren't in them. And usually other people from outside of our communities who spoke for us. And, they gave a whole bunch of stereotypes, blamed ourselves, our backwards culture for our problems and so forth. And a lot of our struggles, if you do study our history, are about education, because a lot of our struggles were to improve our high schools. In Los Angeles in 1968, there was massive blowouts in the high schools. The students there organize to improve their schools, to go on to college, and now we got a lot more professionals who are in these fields, who understand our culture and can speak about our people accurately. And proud for where you are, because very few of us get PhDs or any higher degree. We need our people in those fields to speak for us, and just to do education. Check out some books about our history. Nothing wrong with our culture. It is something to be proud of, and something to hold on to.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that you said oral history, because that's one thing I wish I would have done more of with our relatives who are no longer with us, is
Mhm.
listen to the stories longer, wrote the stories
Yes.
down. I know we had our grandfather, Grandpa Chavez, who was a prisoner of war. I don't know much about his early life and history. I don't know much about our grandmother, who I know was part French and also Spanish. I don't know much about them. So I like hearing those stories. And I think, people should ask the stories. And I know our father and family love telling stories. So being able to even talk to families and even other people's families. I mean, moving to California, I learned a lot from the Latinos out here in terms of their culture by being with their families, getting invited to dinner,
Exactly.
going to barbecues and going to events, and just seeing and observing how they, practice their cultures, the food they cooked, being in the kitchen, and just how much they were keeping those traditions alive through family. And I think that's just
Exactly. And if you, yeah, do have your parents or grandparents or even great grandparents around, yeah, to talk to them. Ask them about their lives. Sit down with them and, yeah, be amazed about what they can tell.
and I know our father has passed, but I was trying to think of, any of his teachings about being a Chicano that you learned from him, or that I was trying to remember, some of the things that he would tell us about our culture. I think the one thing that stood out when I was thinking is right before he passed, I remember talking to him. It was very early on when I was first dating my now husband, who from Pakistani background and Muslim. And I remember being kind of afraid of what my dad would think, telling him I was dating this man from a different culture and religion. And I remember he was just so joyful. Like, hey, they're like us. They're family oriented. They've got a lot of traditions. They've got a lot of culture. And I remember being like, oh, and being married now for almost 10 years, I've realized that, even though we have different cultures, there's a lot of similarities in our traditions and the pride and what we carry through in our culture, even though we're
Yeah,
from
exactly.
backgrounds. But I remember that being one of my dadisms of things that he sort of shared that will always stay with me because I always think about that.
I think, knowing more about, our own culture and history, we see the commonalities. You just need to keep all of that alive.
Amazing. Do you have anything else you'd like to share just about your experience as a Chicano in America, as someone who is now a scholar and taken on this as his life's work that just you would like to share with everyone?
My focus in my scholarly work right now is the Chicano movement in New Mexico because it's a area that has not been studied much and not been written about. I think there's a lot of gaps in the history here. So I'm trying to fill in a lot of those gaps. In my master's work, I did history of a Chicano organization here in Albuquerque, the Black Berets, a group fighting for Chicano rights here in Albuquerque, and they worked all over New Mexico. And there were similar groups all over the country. In history overall, we kind of focus on some of the top national leaders. A lot of research on history is looking more into certain localities. In my research, found a lot of things have gone on here. Want to uncover that and find those stories to be told.
I was going to say that's my biggest takeaway is that there's so much history to learn and to know, and a lot of it hasn't even been written, and we don't realize that that's missing from our life experience until we take a look at that and realize or ask the questions or have these conversations. So I just think the work that you're doing is incredibly important, and I'm happy that you're not only doing it but that you're sharing it with the world for people to be able to learn more about our history as Chicanos. And I think that that has become a very proud term, and I'm glad that you have taken that on and are doing that work. It's going to be life changing, I think, for you, for our culture, for people that are seeking to find themselves and an identity. And thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Well, thank you for letting me interview you. I know I've been asking you for a while, and I appreciate you, taking the time, shedding your knowledge and all that you know, and helping everyone understand more about, the Chicano experience and identity, and just sort of where it comes from, where it's been, and where it's going. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and also, just want to let everyone know that we're not experts or anything. We just do particular work in this field, but there is whatever work you are all doing, it is important, and you have a lot of knowledge that comes from your own histories, your own communities, and that is important. Also, you don't need a degree to bring it out. So yeah, if you're Chicano, Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, or whatever you call yourself, know that history and be proud of it.
Amazing. Love that message. Thank you so much for the interview today.